So good morning, afternoon, evening, or middle of the night, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to the Writing Small panel, where we're going to talk about the challenges and benefits of writing Flash and microfiction. I would like to start out by having our panelists introduce themselves. We will start out with Maria, then Jennifer, then AP.
Hi, I'm Maria Haskins. I'm a reader and reviewer of speculative fiction. I write mostly short stories. I write a lot of Flash and also review a lot of short fiction.
Jennifer, go ahead.
I am Jennifer Hudak. I am also a writer. I write both Flash and short stories. So basically anything under 7,000 words is basically what I write. Yeah, that's me.
Great. And AP?
Hi everyone, I'm AP Thayer. I write cross-genre speculative fiction. I have written things as short as 50 words and things as long as novel length, kind of all over the place. And I'm happy to talk about short fiction.
Great. And I am Dawn Vogel. I'm moderating the panel. I also write basically every length from drabbles on up to having 4 novels published. So, all right. So we're going to start out talking about some definitions because you hear the terms flash fiction, you hear microfiction, you hear drabbles. Some of those have very firm, solid definitions, while others do not. I mean, I think that we can probably all agree a drabble is 100 words exactly, no more, no less. That one's solid. What do you consider the upper limit for Flash? Let's start with Jennifer and then go in the same order we did before, but Maria will be last this time.
So most of the Flash markets, or even like regular short fiction markets that also publish Flash, seem to have a definition of either 1,000 words or 1,500 words as the cap. It's usually one or the other. There's that kind of awkward length, which is under 2,000 words. It's like between 1,500 and under 2,000. I write so many stories that length, and it's like not quite Flash, but it's not quite short stories. But most Flash specific markets, at least the ones that I've seen, seem to say either 1,000 tops or 1,500 tops.
AP, have you seen anything different from that?
No, that's mostly been my experience too. I think, growing up doing this, like the first 3 years I was doing this, it seemed like it was stricter where it was like 1,000 words or less, and then it got kind of loosey-goosey. I do know, I don't know if they've changed it, but Baffling Magazine was doing 1,200 or less as their definition. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But yeah, it's, 1,000, 1,500, kind of around there.
Maria, have you seen anything different than that?
No, I echo the sentiment, like what they say. It's I mean, personally, when I first started, the first Flash stories that I had published were in Flash Fiction online, and they have a super strict, it's 1,000 words. You cannot go over. So in my head, still, I think 1,000 is sort of what I personally would consider the max for Flash, but I see the 1,500 limit a lot now and like Jennifer was saying, and especially in venues that publish longer stories as well, like that sort of, they set that 1,500 limit. I mean, I've seen the Flash, actually the Flash contest they have for the Escape Artist podcasts, they set the limit at 500, which is also kind of a fun length, I think. But yeah, I would say 1,000 is my personal limit. 1,500 is probably like the going thing.
Yeah. One of the other interesting things, you mentioned Flash Fiction Online, and they have a minimum for their Flash of 500, which is really awkward if you write under 500 word pieces, which I write a bit of. And that sort of falls into the microfiction category, but I've also seen microfiction cap off at 250. So there's sort of that wiggle area where it's like, if it's more than 250 words, but less than 500 words, what do you call it? Does it have a name? Yeah.
It's like the novella of the drabble novella is like the 250.
there's at least one place that I've seen that does 280 characters. So basically what's a tweet length these days.
Oh.
And it's like, wow, that's tiny.
Okay,
That's like
yeah.
a couple of sentences.
Mhm.
All right, so next question that I have for you all, and this time we'll start with AP, then Maria, then Jennifer. And what for you distinguishes a flash idea from a full-length story idea? So what do you think makes a story flash-sized other than the word count? And are there specific genres that tend to lend themselves better to smaller stories?
Yes. I I almost find a lot of my brain shutting off when I'm writing flash fiction. When I'm writing longer stuff, I think about structure a lot, probably too much. And that's one of the reasons that I like flash fiction so much is that there's this like switch in my brain that it immediately turns on and it becomes more about like an experience and like an emotion that I'm trying to capture and like something that I'm trying to get the reader to feel and not like, oh, what's the inciting incident and how do we break into two? It's just a completely different, I don't know if it's actually a different part of my brain, but it feels like it is. So I really, really enjoy that aspect about flash fiction. And I think I've forgotten half of your question already. Sorry.
So do you find that different ideas lend themselves better to flash or to short length, or is it for you mostly just the parts of your brain that's being engaged?
I think sort of yes. I think I tend to be more experimental with my flash fiction than I am with my longer stuff. And I kind of let myself, play with point of view, characters, tenses, and that kind of stuff. And it actually opens up a lot for me.
Maria, how about you?
Yeah, I feel like that too. Like it's hard to say when you get a story idea sometimes whether, I mean, I've had story ideas where I very specifically know it's going to be a flash story. And sometimes I've had stories that I tried in vain to make into short stories, like a longer length. And like I have at least two stories where I struggled for years to write like a short story. And in the end, I was just like, I'm so frustrated. I'm just going to like write down like the essence of the story. What is it, like the feeling that I want to evoke with the story? And once I do that, I'm like, oh, there you go. One of them was a drabble. I mean, like that happens. I think um just that thing that it's usually something to want to evoke a feeling or capture a very specific vibe or situation more than plot. And honestly, plot is probably like the weakest point. Like I struggle with that when I write longer stories sometimes. Like, what is the plot? How do I make this plot work? And with Flash, it's just like I can let it go and just do. I mean, it's like that thing, vibes only, no plot.
Yep.
There you
Yep.
go.
Just vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is
Cool.
nice.
Yeah.
And it works. I think for Flash, it definitely works because you don't have to capture a reader for like a big giant novel. You can just do that. You can do that, and it really is. It's lovely to write for that reason.
What about you, Jennifer?
Totally echoing the no plot, just vibes thing. I mean, for me, the last thing, whenever I'm writing a story of any length, the last thing that comes to me is the plot. It's always either the character comes first or a moment comes first, or even sometimes just a visual, like I just have an idea of like this beautiful visual in my head. That's always what comes first to me. And so for me, I absolutely love those kinds of ideas for Flash. It to me, Flash feels like it's like a distillation a little bit. It's you really don't want to have a ton going on. You don't want to have too many characters. You don't want to have um, too many changes of scene, really. It all is very, very condensed into kind of like a moment. I mean, which is not to say that you can't have a Flash with plot. You definitely can, but it's a more of a, I feel like it's more of a distillation of the plot. So I've had experiences where I've written something Flash length and given it to some beta readers who've said, oh, this could be a novel. I really want to hear more about this, and I want to hear more about this. And I'm like, I am not interested in that at all.
Yeah.
That is just not at all what I'm interested in. I mean, and that's awesome that you're interested in that, but like, I'm totally just interested in this one little moment.
Yeah, Maria.
Yeah, I was thinking about the other part of your question, if there are some or another aspect of it, like what things lend themselves to Flash. And I've thought a lot, I've thought a bit about this, like when it comes to like horror, fantasy, science fiction, is there something that works better? And I think horror is a good, like Flash is good for horror. Like you can do the jump scare without doing the rest, or like the horror, like you can really focus on that. And I mean, one of the challenges with Flash, if you're writing fantasy or science fiction, is the setting, like that you're giving, to be able to give enough of the world building in the Flash size, so that the reader understands, like, where are we? Like, what's this world? What time? Like, is this the future? Like, what is happening? So that can be a challenge. I think for me, sometimes you try to pick like a really, like a setting, if it's a science fiction story, something that is fairly commonly known. Like you don't try to make a too strange, like it can be really, it's easy, like, okay, alien invasion, like everyone sort of gets a picture in their head. Like you sort of try to more sketch it in, I guess, the world building. But yeah, I mean, that is one of the challenges, I think, if you're writing Flash, is the world building aspect of it.
Yeah, AP.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on that. I totally agree, Maria, and it's definitely a challenge. But I've also found that at least pretty often readers of flash fiction kind of they know what they're getting into, and they have allowance for that. They're like, yeah, I don't really need to know all this, so like you give me like one or two details, and I'm there, I'm with it. Like, I've definitely gotten the same note, Jennifer, you said, where it's like, oh, I want to, why isn't this novel or whatever, but it's like, you can be in this moment and just kind of understand like two or three kind of framework details that are there, and then just sink into what the story is emotionally, which I think is a really strong part of flash fiction.
I think actually one of the big things about Flash is that you trust the reader. Like you gotta trust and it's not even like trust the reader. You're just gonna have to put it there. Like, I'm trusting you to not want like a ton of detail here, but to feel this story with what I'm giving you and what I have the space for in a Flash story.
Yeah.
I feel too like both of you mentioned like feelings and like the emotional component. I do feel like Flash is, for me, the most successful Flash is very emotionally evocative. Like it hits you in the feels, I feel like, because it is less about any kind of grand progression or anything like that, and it's more just about, oh, like we're getting at the heart of this one moment. So I feel like Flash can be really effective for that.
Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to circle back. I was trying to take notes and think and respond. I agree with what you said, Maria, about horror as well. It's absolutely really good. I actually struggle with fantasy the most. Like, I think science fiction for me is pretty easy for flash fiction as well, but fantasy, just I think, I forget if it was Jennifer or Maria who mentioned it about the setting and the world building. That's the one that I struggle with the most.
Yeah, it is hard. I think sometimes you can play with tropes kind of in a flash to sort of circumvent that problem. You go like, okay, there's a witch. Like, now we're like, you understand that there's magic. You understand that this is not like our world necessarily. And like, but you, again, you have to sketch it in. And it is definitely like one of those, when you're sometimes when I'm editing a flash story, like, how much do I need to explain? And I find usually you have to explain less than you think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for fantasy as well, I mean, I find it very liberating not to have to explain like the magic system.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Like, this is floating, and it's just floating. And so you don't really have to get into it. I find that super liberating.
Absolutely.
And this really segues really nicely into our next question, which is some of the tips and tricks you use to fit a story into a small size. And I think we've talked a little bit about that, where you just sort of sketch in a few details. Like the example that I often use with this is that if I write the 3 words high school gymnasium, I have just put a picture in every one of your heads.
Mhm.
And that's all I need
Yeah.
to do. And it does, I mean, that's obviously for a contemporary setting, you know, but you can say a space station and sort of sketch at least a vague
Yeah.
idea in someone's head. What other tips and tricks do you guys use to get your stuff into a smaller size? And then also, what are some of the challenges? I think we will start with Jennifer this time and go around.
So for me, getting a story to be flash sized means I usually have at most 2 characters. If I have a 3rd character, it's just kind of a bystanding character. So that's kind of a big thing for me. Otherwise, anything other than that gets very unruly for me, and I feel like I need more space. Again, I also feel like the setting is, which doesn't mean that there isn't movement, but it's quite specific and mostly. So, for example, I have a Flash coming out next month that has a bit of a plot in it, but it's all set at the ocean. And so even though it moves, there's like a daytime and a nighttime and a morning time, it's all in this one specific setting, which helps kind of corral things a little bit. So yeah, so for me, those are kind of the main things that I think about when I'm trying to think about, like, is this really a Flash idea? Is those 2 things, is how sprawling is the setting and the time period, and also how many characters does this really involve?
Okay, yeah. How about you, AP?
I really like that word sprawling you used, because that's definitely something I think about a lot. There's 2 main things that I kind of think about. The first is I definitely don't want the sprawling, so I keep a list on my phone of things that just pop into my mind, and it's often like a sentence or a title, or a lot of them are just dream scenes that I've had, and it's because all of those things are so small. I just kind of focus in on that small thing and don't let it grow beyond that. So I know we joke about like vibes only or whatever, but I just try to focus on the vibe of that one sentence or that one title, or just that one scene that I sort of half remember dreaming, and I kind of hold on to that. But the second thing that really helped me, I noticed, Jennifer, you're also in Codex.
Mhm.
The microfiction or the flash fiction contest that they do was just huge for me. I only did it 1 year. I wish I had done it this last year, but um, it just, they give you a picture or a title, and it's all like prompted writing. So you just think like, okay, it's this. I only have a week to write it, and you just don't get in your own head about it. It's too fast. It's too focused, and once I did that, that's how I've treated flash fiction ever since.
And what about you,
Yeah.
Maria?
Yeah, no, I think I echo all those things. Like it's I mean, I think for me, sometimes I try to think of it because sometimes you get a flash idea and it's sort of like part of something where you can see a larger picture. Like this is it's set in the future. I can sort of understand what kind of universe this is in, and but you have a specific scene, a specific setting, a character in mind or something, and you can sort of zoom in on that. You know that all this other stuff. So that's how I sort of see it. Like, okay, so I can see other things around this that I would also maybe touch upon, or could, but like this is the story, and you have to focus in on that part of the story. I think like one of the things that Flash is good at and that I personally love is like the twists. Like you start off telling the story. And so often when I get a Flash idea, when I know it's a Flash idea, it's because I'm really like this, what if you told a story where everyone thought it was about this and it's really about this other thing? So for me, I mean, it sounds sort of mechanical when you do it, but it's often like it has to do with an emotional setting, like characters, but that there is some kind of twist in how you look at the story, so that what you think you're looking at the beginning is slightly different at the end. There's some kind of surprise, which I find is usually what in Flash would sort of works instead of the plot. Like, you don't need a plot, but that there is some kind of, that in my head, when I get the idea, that I can see how it's going to turn. Like, you're going to think it's this, but it's actually this, and I can capture that. So to me, a Flash idea is usually something where I see that turn. Don't have a lot of plot, maybe, like not a giant thing that I want to tell, but just this turn. Where does that point? What is that heart of it that I can turn, and you can see it from a different perspective?
Yeah, Jennifer.
So two things that Maria, that just reminded me that like sometimes a Flash idea for me is also if it's something that's like a little bit bizarre and a little bit experimental, like something that is not going to, I'm not going to be able to sustain it over a story. Readers will not be okay with that. But for 1,000 words, they're going to go along for the ride. And then AP, you mentioned a title. And so I am someone who struggles with titles a lot. Every once in a while, I've got a title that just is so great. And I feel like in Flash in particular, the titles can do so much work, especially if you're keeping under a certain word count. The title can give valuable information to the reader without adding to your word count, which I think is so great, especially if you have an unconventional structure like a list form or something like that.
And actually, that's a great way, I think, to keep, if you're struggling with how to structure a Flash piece or how to write it, sometimes like doing the list, like the epistolary different forms of that, like a found document, a diary entry, someone speaking it into, like someone recording a message. If you think about it, if you write it like that, it can sometimes sort of make it easier to write it Flash, because it's limited in scope just from how you structure it. So that would be one tip that I would have if you're having trouble finding a way to write a Flash story, if you find it really hard to sort of focus in, to do something like a list, do it like a text message conversation, something like that.
I just read something that definitely not Flash, but it's nominated for a Hugo right now, that is told entirely in text messages, and it is gorgeous and it's amazing. And I really wish I could remember what the title actually is.
Is it Sarah Pinsker's?
No.
Where Oak and Hearts Do Gather?
No, it's not that one. This one,
because
this
that
one
was
is
like a message board conversation that
yeah, this one it's basically a time travel trans story, and it is just brilliant. I'll find it and I'll post it on the Discord later, because so the next question that I have, and I know that AP mentioned that he is not a poet, and that is totally fine, but I know Maria and Jennifer, both of you, as well as me, we write poetry as well as writing Flash. And I wonder if there are techniques from poetry that lend themselves well to Flash and vice versa. How about Maria first?
Yeah, a very long time ago, in the beginning of the world, I debuted as a writer of poetry. It's so long ago that we're not going to talk about that. But I do find one thing that I found very interesting for myself is that once I started writing Flash, which is about 7 years ago now, I guess, I stopped writing poetry almost entirely. Now, partly that's, I think, just time things but it's also that I found that some of the ideas that I would approach to a poem when I was more focused on poetry I was instead writing Flash. So for me, there's definitely a connection there. And I think one of the connections is that you write a poem, you don't have to explain everything. Like you can just put it out there because the prose itself is expressing something. Even how you say something, like the style, the voice you've got, like in a poem, is part of how you express what it's about. And I find that Flash is like that too. So that's a big one. And also, like I mentioned before, like this whole trust the reader. Like when you write a poem, no one's going to expect you to like lay out some big explanation. I'm writing about, like the dangers to the world from environmental degradation, but like you can capture it anyway. But you have to trust the reader and yourself, I think, to not explain everything. And that's definitely something that I find that I did when I was writing poetry, and that I also think about a lot when I write flash.
Jennifer, what do you want to add to that?
So I actually I'm more of a novice poet. I mean, I don't publish my poetry, but I do write
Okay.
poetry, and I like Maria, I kind of started out writing poetry. I definitely feel like some of my flash pieces are prose poems more than they are flash fiction.
Yeah.
Definitely, especially the ones that are light on plot, they feel like prose poems. And for
Mhm.
me, what that means is that I think the where poetry and flash overlap is in the work that each word has to do. So like, because you have so few words to work with, every word really matters. You can't
Yeah.
just write whatever. Everything has to do a few different jobs. Every sentence, words in the sentence, they have to do so much work. And I feel like poetry, reading it as well as writing it, gets you a little bit into that mindset of
Yeah.
like, this is what a real deep dive into language gets you. And so, yeah.
AP, did you have any questions you wanted to ask us about that? Is that anything you're
Well,
interested
no,
in?
just while listening now, I was thinking to myself, like, I feel like there's definitely a blurred line between poetry and flash, and where do you draw that line? Because I'm thinking back to some of like, I don't read a lot of poetry, I definitely don't write it, but like Federico Garcia Lorca and stuff like that, like, there's definitely like flash in there, like
Yeah.
it feels that way. So, I can definitely see how that's helpful.
All right, so now we're on to the question that that many of our listeners are probably going to be very interested in is, once you've written your flash story, how do you find homes for it? Where do you find good homes to send your flash? And are there any markets that you particularly like sending to? And we'll start with AP and go around.
Um, I I would say the first step after that, I'm just going to assume that you've at least had a couple eyes on it, and that you have a
Sure.
critique group. So once you've done that, I'm a little mercenary when it comes to this kind of stuff. And I just go to Submission Grinder, I put in my word count and my genres, and then I sort it um, by pro paying and how quickly they get back to me.
Yeah.
So you send it off to the place where you can get rejected in a day and a half, and you can kind of move on from there. I don't have specific places that I submit to, like I want to submit here, but I have been, looking at daily science fiction and flash fiction online and hoping to get in there.
Yep. All right, Maria, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I use the submission grinder too. I'm like a religious user of that when I have a story going out. Now, I also have had 5 of my stories published by Flash Fiction Online, so you can tell I'm a little bit biased there. But part of the reason is they pro pay, and also they're fairly quick to get back. So it's always been a good choice. The other thing that I've also had is a couple of Flash Fiction stories that I wrote that are just barely speculative, that I could send to Flash Fiction Online, because they also do like non-speculative fiction. So I love Flash Fiction Online. I know, like, I mean, there are a lot of places. There's the Arcanist, there's the Daily SF, Factor 4. I think they're back in business now.
They are.
So there are a lot of places, and if you're writing Drabbles, Martian Magazine are up again, so they are also a great place to send your stuff. But yeah, Submission Grinder, use it.
All right, Jennifer, what do you think?
I also use the submission grinder. I
think
do
we all
want to
do.
say, yeah, I mean, it's such a great resource. If you're not
Yeah.
on there, it's really fantastic.
And
I do.
importantly, it's free.
It's free, yes.
Yes.
I do want to say that from the mercenary standpoint, because I typically do the same thing. For flash stories, though, sometimes the difference between pro paying and not pro paying is like a few dollars, just because the
Yeah,
word
It's
count
true.
is so small.
Yeah.
It's a good point.
So sometimes if there's a market that I'm like, ah, this would just be great for this market, and they are not pro paying, sometimes I do send it there because it is, that if you're talking money, it's not that big of a difference. Plus, there are some semi-pro places that are very well read. So,
Yes. That's
I
the
also wanted to say that there are like, the flash markets that everyone's mentioned. I also love flash fiction online. I feel like flash fiction online um, welcomes, they do like stories with a beginning, middle, and an end, but they also
Mhm.
do welcome kind of a more literary voice, which I like.
Yeah.
Daily Science Fiction, which publishes like a little of everything. I would say
Yes.
that they publish more traditional stuff, but the story that I had published there was the prose poem. So I mean, but there's also a lot of non-flash specific markets that take flash. So I have a flash coming out in Kaleidotrope. I have one coming out in fantasy and science fiction next month. Um, Anthologies a lot of time are looking for flash. So you definitely can look farther than, I mean, not every publication takes flash, but a lot of them are open to flash. So it's definitely worthwhile to just plug in that word count and see what comes up.
Yeah.
Kaleidotrope
The
is a great market, I think, for Flash also because they are very like broad, like what they'll accept. Like just it's a great zine, and I just find they have a great. I was thinking too that I've noticed that both Lightspeed and Nightmare now have like when you're going through their stories, they've got a separate thing for flash fiction. Like you can click the flash fiction thing and just see the flash. Now they're not open very often, but they were open this earlier this year. I
I
saw a
think
specific
Lightspeed
flash
is
called
still
The
open.
Oh, they
Uncanny
still
and
open? Yeah.
Nightmare.
I think
Oh, are
so.
they?
Yeah.
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 Lightspeed is, yeah. I've
Yeah.
got a story
Oh,
sitting with
Lightspeed
them
is,
right
that's
now,
right.
so fingers crossed. The other
I'm
thing that
this yeah. And so I think there are places, I mean, if you're looking for like Uncanny was open for like a week, Nightmare was open for like a week for Flash.
Mhm.
So I mean, you have to sort of hit the sweet spot that you've got a story that you can send out.
Yeah.
And that they're open. But
The other note that I wanted to bring up is that some of the token paying markets that accept Flash, if you look at it on a per word basis, you wind up getting paid pro rates if you sell them something that's short enough. I've had
right.
some where I'm like, it's a 500 word story and they're paying $50. Oh, that's so worth it.
Yeah.
So, look beyond the pro markets if you're looking at Flash, especially if you've got a smaller word count, because there
Yeah.
are some great options for that. All right,
Yeah,
we have got.
sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
to talk about semi-pro, a lot of, maybe not a lot, but I've definitely seen a lot of semi-pro markets do a much better job with their online presence and promoting your story. It seems like they care more, so it often gets you more eyes on your work than you would at some of the bigger ones.
Apparition Lit is great. They've got a
Yes.
monthly
Hmm.
Flash competition that they run. The Escape Artists podcast, when they've got their Flash fiction contests, great place to go. Lots of people read your story and vote on it. Maybe vote it out in the first round. Still, like
The other great thing about the podcast flash fiction contest is that you often will get comments on your
yeah.
story from other people, other writers. So it's a great way to sort of write something and test it out. Just test out the
So
waters
if you
there
don't die
because
from constructive
exactly.
criticism, which
All right, we've got a bunch of questions that came in from the audience. I hope that I have grabbed them all. We will try to get to as many of them as we can. So let's see here. Where do we want to start? Um, so I think we've talked a little bit about this, but are there any tricks that you can use to train your brain to think smaller rather than bigger? Because, a lot of the times you come up with this idea and you're like, oh, this is going to be great. And then you're sitting there and you're like, and it's a short story, and it's a novella, and it's a novel. So how do you train your brain to just stay within the lines, Jennifer?
So for me, it's just practice. I mean, and that was where what AP mentioned, the flash fiction contests through Codex, but there's other places you can go to, just practicing writing flash. The thing about those flash fiction contests is that it's like 5 stories in 5 weeks, and you're just churning out flash, and not only that, but reading a ton of flash. So I think those two things is just practicing writing them and also reading as much flash as you can helps just kind of helps you internalize what shape a flash is and kind of what you can fit into that shape.
AP or Maria, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, when I started writing flash, it was for a podcast. I was not paid. It was just like through a friend of mine, the Word Count podcast. I had never written flash, but I was invited to write, and so I knew the story. I would have to read it in 7 minutes, which is flash, and it was the story prompt also. And I think that sort of corrals your mind into like, okay, it has to have the story prompt. It has to somehow be related to the story prompt. I have to be able to read it in 7 minutes. And you sort of, I think if you enjoy that challenge, which I found when I started writing flash, that I really did, not just to tell a story, but that it has to fit this size. It's like another challenge. It's just like coming up with the character, coming up with the world, coming up with anything, but like it also has to fit. Like, and if you really, and like Jennifer says, you can sort of train your mind to sort of go to that place where, okay, I've got the story, but it has to be like this size. And it's really freeing and very creative way to work once you sort of get started with it. And just to do it, like just do it, even if it's like not the perfect story. When you're done, write it and then work on the next one and the next one, and you sort of learn through that process. And because it's flash, you don't have to sit like, you don't have to write all the 100,000 words. You only have to get like 500 words, 1,000 words. Like it's
It's a little dopamine hit, right?
Yeah, and definitely I finished something.
Also, I have to say that when I was talking about reading a lot of flash to kind of get yourself, the flash that I read when I was first starting to write flash was your collections of Maria, your dark flash collections. You've got like 3 or 4.
For the word
I own all of them on ebook. You guys can look up Maria Haskins' Dark Flash. They were what kind of inspired me to start writing flash. So just a little thank you to you for that.
You.
Very cool. AP, how about you? What do you think about training your brain?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Jennifer Maria said. The Codex thing was huge for me, and writing to prompt, it almost emotionally disconnects you from the story a little bit, because you're like, it's not actually 100% my story, so I don't care about it that much, so I can kind of get in and out and just throw it away. It's like sort of the beginning thought process, and then of course you get invested into it and you care about it. It's all good. But starting off in a place where you're not like, oh, this is my baby, this is like, my magnum opus or whatever. It's just kind of like, oh, here's 1 or 2 cool things that this prompt is telling me to think about. I'm going to focus on these things, and then there's a little bit of wiggle room, and let's see what happens. And because it's so short, like Maria said, if it doesn't work, you're like an hour gone or something. Like it's fine, and you just do that a bunch.
Yeah. Yeah, I've thought about it sometimes as the story prompt is almost like soliciting a story from your brain. Like you tell your brain, okay, we need a story about this photo prompt, which is a dog that's like digging a hole. Okay, so now we've solicited the story. Come on, brain. Like
Yes.
we don't even have to care about it that much, just like you say, AP, but like that's what we need. We need the story about the dog digging the hole somehow. What are you gonna do with that?
So another question that someone asked is if there is a favorite flash fiction piece that you've read that really changed or challenged the way that you thought about storytelling. Like what, I mean, it sounds like Jennifer got some inspiration from Maria, which is awesome. So maybe Maria, let's start. Where did you get your inspiration for your Flash? Like, was there a
Yeah.
story that you read that really gelled and made you go, oh, this is what this is about?
I read so much flash fiction at Flash Fiction Online, and of course now I'm completely blanking on everything. I would say for me, even though it's not precisely a flash, or is it? Probably the story that when I started writing flash that I thought about was Ray Bradbury's The One Who Waits, which is might not be exactly flash size, but it feels like flash. Very evocative, and that story I think sort of set the sort of how I can still read that story and sort of see the flash structure and the flash idea. It's very Bradbury, and yeah, just the evocativeness of that piece.
What about you, AP? Any
Yeah, Quartet of the Far Blown Winds by Matt Dovey, who was a winner, and he participated in Codex and all that. When I did Codex, that was one of the ones that they linked to, and I read that, and I still remember. I feel like there was like a pre-Flash me and then a post-Flash me, and that was definitely the story where I was like, this guy, he just did so much in so little time. Like, this is amazing. So yeah, that's definitely the one that always just hammers the back of my mind.
yeah. What about you, Jennifer?
Aside from Maria, there's actually a story that was one of the winners of one of the Podcastle Flash contests, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's by Amy Ogden. I don't know if any of you guys can remember it, but if you look it up, it's Amy Ogden, and it's about the three cats. There's a. Do you remember, Maria?
Yeah, and I can't remember the name of it either, but I know which story you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah. It should be easy to find if you look it up.
There's
But that
Amy
was
Ogden,
one that,
and it's AIMEE is how Amy is spelled.
yes, Aimee Ogden. The
Three
three
cats
cats at
at
the end of the
the
world.
top.
Thank you. Someone put it in the chat. Yes, that's it. And that was like I actually had just met Amy when I read that story. And it was the kind of thing where I met Amy and she was this like really nice person and we were friends. And then I read that and I was like, oh, like you're that person. Oh my gosh, you wrote that. So yeah, that's a fantastic one. Again, just from like it just made me think like, oh, you can do that. Like that's something you can do
Yes.
in Flash.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of it when you read a lot of Flash. Like you start to go, oh, you can actually just do that, and like nobody's going to stop you.
Yeah. There's a long-standing sort of, I think it's changed in more recent years, but there's a long-standing like, oh, don't write in second person. Don't ever write in second person. There is a lot of great Flash in second person because you can do that. You can experiment. You can play with things. You can go, no, I'm writing this about you.
I love writing second person for
Oh, me
Flash.
too.
Oh, it's so good.
I write in second person a lot. So
Yeah.
write in
I just
second person.
remember hearing I think it was a short story written in second person, and it was about determining the gender of chickens. And the person who wrote it was like, yeah, and everybody told me not to do this, and I did it anyway. And it was great. It was just so much fun. Okay, I think we've got time for one more of these questions off of the chat, and then we will have everybody just do a quick summary of where we can find you online. So when you've submitted Flash fiction and gotten it accepted for publication, and you do the happy dance, of course, how much revision do you find that editors are looking for with Flash, or do you find that Flash is a little more hands-off when it comes to revisions from the editors? Maria, let's start with you.
Oh, okay. So like I said, I'd say usually it's not that much. I would say usually, because there's just not like either it works or it doesn't sort of thing, I guess. But I had one of my stories, 6 Dreams About the Train, which came out in Flash Fiction Online, where Suzanne Vincent, who was the editor then, when I sent that in, so that is probably the most major edit I've ever had. She wanted me to basically take a whole section of the story and change it so that that was the beginning. She has a couple of other things too. And once I did that, I was like, oh my God, that's wow. So anytime I've gotten a major edit, like major in Flash land, it's been, you know, you work with an editor that you like and you trust, that's worked and it's become much better. So that's probably the most major edit I've ever had on a Flash story. Otherwise, it'll be usually like, could you explain what's happening here? Because I don't know what's going on. But you know, it can be a good thing to have a major edit, even if it feels like at first, like, what the heck, you're poking up my story.
Yeah.
But
Just to interrupt quickly, when someone asks you that story, is your answer just always no? Because I feel like that's always my answer. It's like, no, I'm not going to explain this.
Too bad you don't
What do
get
you
it.
think?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there is so much of writing that is, well, what do you think the story's about, you know?
Yeah.
And especially with Flash. AP, what has your experience been with revisions on Flash?
Basically entirely hands off. Maybe some line editing stuff, but it's kind of just like, yeah, it either, like, I forget who said it, but it either works or it doesn't. And yeah, that's been my experience.
Okay. And you, Jennifer?
I had a extremely similar experience with Suzanne Vincent and Flash Fiction Online, and I feel like she tended to do that. Like, so I think it does depend on the editor, but I feel like at least for her, she did not send me a contract until we had gone through the revision, and she was like, "Okay, yes, this is working." So it's a little bit, and other. I know that there are other editors that work that way, not just with Flash. Like the editor of Metaphorosis also will do that. So, but yeah, that was Mirrored, that came out in Flash Fiction Online, and it was so rewritten from when I first turned it in, thinking it was like absolutely perfect and done, and then I was like, oh, but the ideas that she had resonated with me, and so I was like, well, I'm going to give it a shot. And again, when you're overhauling a Flash story, it doesn't take as long as overhauling something much larger. So you can kind of do it and see if it works. And then if it does, it's good. But yeah, that story was very, very rewritten. I think every other Flash I've done has either had no changes or has had very, very minor edits. But yeah, it definitely depends on the editor.
All right, so last things for our panel before we wrap up is just let folks know where they can find you online. And also, I just wanted to let folks know that the Discord has been hopping. I don't know if any of you have time or want to jump over there later, but I think there's a lot of stuff to read and to possibly respond to over there. And I will personally try to jump over there and do some Discord, but if anybody else wants to, we may continue this conversation. The chat rooms on the Discord are generally open for about an hour after the panel before the next panel comes in. So we've got time to chat more about Flash fiction if folks are interested. So AP, where can folks find you online?
I'm at apthayer.com, or I'm very active on Instagram. I'm semi-active on Twitter, also apthayer.
Okay. Maria, what about you?
Yes, my website is mariahaskins.com, and I'm mostly on Twitter, so it's Maria Haskins on Twitter as well. I have my short story collection, 6 Dreams About the Train, which is the title of a Flash story. So there you go. That's included in my book. So, and Dark Flash, my Dark Flash Flash fiction and collections that are also available on Amazon, I think, mainly.
Cool. And Jennifer?
And I am jenniferhudackwrites.com. I'm also on Twitter at Right Run Yoga, which I wish I could change at this point. But yes, so Right Run Yoga is my Twitter handle.
It was a different time.
What's that?
It was a different time when
It was a different time. And of course, most people think that it's writer un-yoga. So it's not, it doesn't even work for what it was, but whatever, it's fine. But I am on Twitter quite often, also on my website. And yeah, I do have a Flash story coming out next month in fantasy and science fiction. It's my very first publication at fantasy and science fiction. So I'm like, I'm going to be insufferable when it comes out, just warning you all.
All right, and I am at historythatneverwas.com because I did not cleverly get my name as my writer website. And then I'm on Twitter as History Never Was because they shortened how much space I could have to write out my name. So yes, check us all out online. Check us out on the Discord. We will be around. It's great talking with all three of you. Thank you so much for this panel. And
So
thank you to our wonderful audience and
you.
questions.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dawn.